Hi everybody, this is Lainey at Hilltop Home Place. This is an impromptu video. It never occurred to me to film this for a video, but then I got to thinking, if I don't film this now and I try to film it later, it may not do you any good. And what I'm talking about is making turkey dressing. Well, I call it turkey dressing. It's really made with chicken, but my whole life we've called it turkey dressing. It's the cornbread dressing you make for Thanksgiving. You serve, in the buffet of food that you make at Thanksgiving. My grandmother, well, both of my grandmothers actually made it delicious, made it wonderful. Neither one of them ever wrote the recipe down, and at the time, I just didn't ask the right questions. I've lost both grandmothers, of course, and I had to figure out on my own through the years how to cook it. And I've kind of nailed it down. I have a little process I use now. It's not really that hard, but it makes the biggest, best pan of cornbread dressing that I could ask for. I love it. My kids love it. Grandkids eat it. And I decided to go ahead and make some tonight because I was wanting to cook something to send to my mom's. And we try to cook for her every now and then. She can still do things and cook and pick up food when she's out. But we try to do a little home cooking for her every now and then. And as she's gotten older, it's harder for her to eat things with rice. Sometimes pasta doesn't even do real well with her thyroid, I guess her I should say esophagus, maybe, with her digestive tract. And so it's hard sometimes to think of things to cook that don't have a lot of rice and all that in them, or pasta, or, it's just kind of hard sometimes. So I was thinking, well, some cornbread dressing would probably hit the spot. Maybe I'll make her some cornbread dressing. Then I realized I have my grandkids coming tomorrow. They'll eat it. That'll be something I can heat up really easy for them to eat when they're hungry. We love it. We need food cooked anyway. I need some stuff around here. So I thought I would make this big old pan of dressing. It's not going to go to waste. So I'll show you how I do it. I'm actually already in it. I'm already cooking. So I'll show you how I do it. And maybe this year for Thanksgiving, if you don't already have one of your own recipes that you just love, maybe you can kind of do this. I'm going to kind of give some exact amounts, but I'll be honest with you, when people are cooking things through the years, that you kind of just eyeball things, but I'm going to try to give it to you as best I can in some amounts. Here we go. I had to dig these items out of the garbage, but what I do is I just get a big bowl, one big bowl, and I use 2 of these boxes of Jiffy cornbread mix because it's kind of got a sweet taste to it. And I balance it with 3 bags of this Martha White Mexican style cornbread mix. So 3 of these and 2 of the Jiffies. And whatever it calls for on the bag, which I can tell you, it calls for 1 egg per bag of everything, per box. It calls for 1 egg. And then the Jiffy calls for 1/3 of a cup of milk. The Martha White Mexican cornbread calls for 2/3 cup of milk. So I'll just tell you, a shortcut is it's going to end up being 5 eggs you're going to add to this and 2 2/3 cup of milk. I don't want to tell you that this cornbread dressing will turn out better using anything else. This is what I use. This is what the recipe calls for. And the recipe is basically just my creation. So I can just tell you, when I've tried to substitute other brands of cornbread mix, it does not taste the same. You need the Martha White Mexican, 3 bags. And you need the Jiffy, 2 bags. And it makes a perfect cornbread mix to me. The cornbread dressing is done in steps. When you mix that cornbread mix, I go ahead and take a really large pan, because I don't want it really deep, because I want it to get done kind of like regular cornbread. So you don't want a smaller pan that's going to make it real deep. I take a large baking pan like this. Go ahead and mix all 5 packages of cornbread mix, your 5 eggs and your 2 2/3 cup of milk, and spray this with Pam, and then pour your mix in there. If you're doing it one little box at a time, one box calls for like 400, one calls for 425. I just went ahead and put this at like $3.95. You can put it at 400 if you want to, but basically you're just wanting to cook all 5 boxes of that cornbread mix all at one time. This is not far from being ready. I would just say, I don't know how long it takes. It'll just start pulling away from the sides. You'll be able to touch the middle and tell that the middle has gotten really firm. But be sure and let it get, if you're going to cook this, let it get a little to the overdone side, because you want that middle to be cooked. There's nothing worse than having the soggy cornbready stuff mixed up with your cornbread dressing. You want it all to be dried out and cooked. So here in a minute, I'm gonna be taking this out. You're building a little building block thing when you're making this. I add, and this is completely optional, but y'all, it's delicious. And I make all the cornbread dressing for a lot of our Thanksgiving dinners for the extended family and all, and everybody tears it up. My second step is to boil eggs. Let's see, I've got 9 eggs in here. You can put however many you want, 9, 10, something like that. But I'll boil these eggs. In a little bit, I'll run cold water over them, and I'll peel them, and then I'll chop them up and put them in my big bowl. Going back to the cornbread, when it's ready in a minute, what I'll do is I'll let it sit on the counter for just a little bit to let it get cool enough for me to work with. And then I just kind of take a butter knife and cut it into all kind of little strips and pieces. And then I'll just start crumbling it with my hands. And then I put that in my big bowl. I'll put the eggs in the big bowl with the cornbread. And my next layer is chicken. You can use whatever kind of meat you want, but my recipe calls for just boneless chicken thighs. This is about, I don't know, maybe 2 pounds or 2.5 pounds of boneless chicken thighs. Whatever you have, just use that. You can have less or more meat in it. That part doesn't affect the taste. You really just need to stick with the recipe as far as the cornbread and the eggs and everything else I'm fixing to tell you for the taste. But the amount of meat can shrink or get bigger. It doesn't matter. I had a big, nice pack of boneless chicken thighs, and I just sprinkle a little Tony Chachere's on each side of them. And then I laid them in this skillet, and I'm letting them cook. I'm going to flip them in a minute and cook the other side. And then when they're done, I'm basically just going to cut it in little bite-sized pieces and put that in the bowl with my cornbread and my eggs. My husband's grandmother had these big metal milk pans, and she used them for so much, for all her canning and everything. But I find that this is the best thing to mix all of this in. The next layer that I'm going to do is when that chicken comes out of the pot, I'm going to put vegetables in. I'm going to probably chop up this whole thing of green onions. If I don't, I may take 3 or 4 of them out, but pretty much, depending on how much I trim off of this and everything, I might use this whole bag. But basically, I just use green onions. I'm going to chop up about 2 onions. That right there is up to you as well. I usually use at least 2 onions. And I started to buy some celery, but I actually had some celery in my freezer. I'm going to drain the water off of this. It's kind of thawed. I'm going to drain the water off, but it'll do fine. I'm going to throw it in there. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop the onions, chop the green onions, throw the celery in there, and I'm going to cook all of this in the juice drippings from the chicken. If you had another pot you wanted to do it in and go ahead and have it going at the same time your chicken's going, that's fine too. Just put a little bit of cooking oil or something in the bottom of that skillet and get that done. So this is a layer. It's really easy. From here on out, it's not much to this dressing. This is a layer, your vegetables. You want to cook those. I might even put a little butter in my skillet and let a little butter be in these. But you're going to cook your vegetables. You've got your chicken going. You've got your eggs going. And you got your cornbread going. So that's your 4 main components. Cornbread, eggs, chicken, and vegetables. Okay, layer 1 chicken in the bowl. Now I'm going to do the cornbread. And this is where I'll just take it and do this to it. You can pick up the little things and kind of crumble them a little bit. If they don't get completely crumbled, it's okay. Because you're going to be stirring things. You're going to be adding broth to this, and some of this will break down. But I try to get it as crumbly as I can. Probably be easier if I just did it all over in this pan first. Tomorrow is August 31st. So the time is kind of now to start thinking about your holiday menus. They'll start putting things on sale. Grab it. Grab as much of it as you can afford. Have it on sale. When I decided to make this today, the only thing I really had to go get was chicken. I had some chicken in my freezer, but it was some chicken breast. I like using chicken thighs for this. It's just so much more moist. So I went and got chicken, and then I went and I got the green onions, same store, and I think that was it. Because of my pantry stocking that I do and buying things when they're on sale and I actually make a lot of broth. I have a lot of homemade broth. But for this, I just use the store-bought. But I already had it, so I didn't have to buy it today. And I'll tell you why. I could use my broths. But a lot of the homemade broths, which while they're delicious, sometimes the taste isn't as consistent because depending on what you're using and whether you roasted it and this, that, and the other, it's delicious, don't get me wrong. I just need a plain broth for this, just plain. And if I'm gonna give this recipe to y'all, or if I'm gonna show friends how to make this, one of my cousins asked me how to make it and I wrote it down for her. It needs to be things that are easily able to duplicate for other cooks. If everything that I needed for this was homemade, it just would be harder. Like I have, from Azure Standard, I ordered mushroom soup mix, where you make it yourself. And so I have powdered mushroom soup mix and all that stuff. But for this recipe, I'm just using the canned stuff. You know, just the canned mushroom soup mixes you get off the aisle. It's so much easier to tell somebody else how to cook it if you're just using regular things from the store. So this should be easy for y'all to duplicate. So this is what 5 packs of cornbread looks like, all packed together. And when you crumble it up, this is what it looks like. Kind of half fills one of these big pans here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start putting it in the pan here. I'm gonna clean this pan up, and I'm actually gonna be using it to cook my dressing in a minute because I only have one of these right now. I just chopped the eggs straight into the bowl. Nothing fancy going on there. I'm actually working against the clock. My husband's outside, and he'll be calling me any minute because it's getting dark to go get him. So, then the TV will be on, and then the last of this video will probably be voiced over. It's kind of my schedule I have to work on. Now, for those of you that might just think it's terrible to put boiled eggs in here, I just have to ask you to please try it. This is something both my grandmothers did. Everybody I know grew up eating eggs in their dressing. It makes a good filler to kind of extend your dressing. My grandmother, one of them, used to even make the giblet gravy to go with everything. And she would put boiled eggs in the giblet gravy as well. And it kind of also, the yolks kind of served as a thickener to that gravy. It was delicious. I'm probably the only one in our family that will kind of like and eat giblet gravy because of my grandma. But talking about my regular family, my kids and my husband, none of them really cared for it. But I grew up eating it because she cooked it. And it was so good. It was just so good. She would boil those giblets to death and then chop them up in little pieces and then have that boiled egg in there and chop up. Oh, it was so good. Now, this was 9 eggs. I'm almost done. If I had a sharper knife, I might be worried about cutting myself, but I'm not worried about cutting myself. I do cut myself in the kitchen every now and then. That's just life. You can tell I'm not a trained chef, but you know what? It works. Now I'm just going to take my clean hands and kind of stir this up together, get the eggs and the meat to the top and all mixed up in it. And I'm going to walk over here and get my veggies because they just got ready. Put all the onions and stuff in there. The skillet's heavy and it's hard for me to pick up, so I'm just going to get them out as best I can. Okay, I'm going to reiterate again. That's the 4 pillars of the dressing. The vegetables, the eggs, the cornbread, and the chicken. I'm going to stir it all together. To season the dressing, I just put a little salt. Not much, because your soups are going to have salt in it. I put a little black pepper. And I put a little bit of ground sage or rub sage, whatever you have. If you don't like sage, just don't use it. But I like to put just a little bit, not overdo it. That's about it. For the moisture layer, as I call it, it's just where you're binding it together. I use 3 cans of cream of chicken soup. I happen to have Campbell's. You can use the store-bought if you want. And I use 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup. And then I just grab a big box of the chicken broth, the Swanson chicken broth, and I'll just use as much out of that as it takes. I can't always tell you the exact amount for the broth, because you have to kind of judge when your cornbread has absorbed enough and it can't really absorb anymore. After that, it'll start getting runny and just take a lot longer to cook, even though it'll still taste good. So I kind of like to hit a sweet spot with it, and it just depends on when you feel like you've gotten that sweet spot. So I can't really tell you how many ounces of this I use, but I just go ahead and open a big container of it and work with that. I add all 5 cans of soup into here, and then I kind of, while it's on the top of the mixture, I kind of mix the soups together with my spoon, kind of get them incorporated, and then I'll work on putting my broth in there. I'll stir the soups into the cornbread mixture, and then I'll start adding the broth. Right now, I just started with about half the box. Y'all, in the end, you're going to be surprised at how this recipe turns out. But I don't know why I don't write things down. I just kind of do it year to year, by ear, just kind of going at it. But in the end, I actually use exactly the 48 ounces that it's in this box. And I probably do that every year. I just didn't write it down. But you just pour a little at the time if you want to get to kind of learn the feel of it all. Pour about half the box and then stir it in. And then pour a little more of the box and then stir it in. And what you're doing is you're letting your cornbread kind of soak in that broth. You want this to be very, very wet in the end, but not soupy. And as I said, I poured in the last of the box, and I knew, I could tell at that point, it could take the last of that box, and it was going to be fine. So for the recipe's sake, it worked out great. 48 ounces, just 1 large box of the broth right off the shelf at the store, worked out perfect. So after I incorporate all this in together, and it's important to get it all stirred in, give it just a minute to let it soak it in, and then we're going to be ready to put it in the pan. I washed my big sheet pan. I'm just going to use the same one I cooked the cornbread in. Spray it with some Pam to keep the cornbread from sticking around the edges. And then it's just time to dump this big bowl of your ingredients in. That's all the prep you really have to do. It's really not that hard. The longest thing, it's just cooking your chicken and stuff. But after that, it's really not that hard. I just kind of smooth it out a little bit. I don't know, kind of get clumps of it out. Make sure you don't have big clumps of chicken or anything. And once I do that, I just kind of smooth it out, and then I'm ready to put it in the oven. And what I do is I cover it with tin foil, because it's such a large pan of dressing that I don't want it to start crisping around the edges and getting all too done around the edges at first. You want it to cook good in the middle. So I cover it for about the first hour and a half. I'm going to cook it for an hour and a half in the oven. Then I'll take this foil off, and then I'll cook it until it's done after that. I'm going to go at 335 for that first hour and a half, and then I'll probably bump it up to 350 once I take the tin foil off. Well, here it is. It's done. It looks delicious. I cooked it for an hour and a half at 335, took the tin foil off, and I cooked it another 45 minutes to kind of brown the top, and it looks perfect. I measured this pan. This pan is 12 inches by 19 inches. It's a huge pan. It almost takes up the whole width of my stove. And I think you could feed 25 to 30 people out of this pan of dressing at Thanksgiving, especially considering you're going to have all kind of other side dishes and stuff too. But this is a good main dish type dish, and it really didn't cost that much. Your only big expense was the chicken thighs. You could even use a broiler and just debone it if you want to. And then you had eggs, 5 cans of soup, some veggies, and some broth, and some packs of cornbread mix. It's really not that bad of an expense for such a main dish for a holiday. I think everybody will enjoy it. Our family enjoys it, and I'm looking forward to having this pan a little bit early and enjoy some holiday food a little bit early this year. I hope you enjoyed this recipe and watching me cook this cornbread dressing with chicken in it. If you have any questions whatsoever, please ask me down in the comments and I'll try to address it if there's anything that I forgot to say. It's pretty simple though. It's just kind of little building blocks and then you put it all together in one pan and cook it. And it's so easy. And you, in the meantime, while it's cooking, you could do so much more of your other holiday cooking and get things accomplished. It's really just an easy thing to kind of throw together and do. And I always thought it was so hard, but it's really, really not. This is Lainey at Hilltop Home Place. Thank y'all so much for joining me. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.